Hi all, my name is Davis and welcome back to the Tech Rundown, the weekly show where I review everything you need to know in the world of tech over the past week, in a hopefully not completely boring way. Today we've got stories on a sales crisis brewing within Huawei. There's some great news for Google Pixel owners, there's yet another example of Apple bowing down to government pressure, Microsoft abandoning their greatest product line, and more. Remember that if you want your say on any of the stories, do comment below and I may even feature it in next week's episode. Now, from last week's show on a story about Huawei launching the new Harmony Next OS, where I said that it was clearly inspired by the look and feel of iOS, on TikTok, Lydia Nelson commented, "Please, you are just hating on Huawei. Totally needless." And on YouTube, Huawei A1A1 commented, "iPhone copy Huawei and Huawei is years better than Samsung and Apple. You have much to learn." Yikes, did I touch a CCP nerve there? Did my very sound argument exclaiming my disappointment that Huawei's new from the ground up Harmony OS Next operating system, a possible third challenger to the mobile OS duopoly, looking almost exactly like iOS when there was ample opportunity to actually bring something new and exciting to the table, not abide the party line? Well, if you watch my channel, at the very least you will know that I will not be swayed by communist propaganda and communist sympathizers, and I will continue to provide sound, balanced coverage of all the stories that I cover. On the other hand, I might want to revisit my homeland one day, so maybe I should bite my tongue a little. So let's see, what is the first story? And it's a downturn in Huawei phone sales. So that's great, I guess. Anyway, so I'm just going to be trolled for another week, I guess. But before then, let's check out the sponsor for the week. And this video is sponsored by the Ultrahuman Ring Air. If you are looking for a more discreet alternative to a smartwatch, then the Ultrahuman Ring Air is the gadget that you are looking for, because it is a smart gadget that doesn't look like a smart gadget, because it looks just like a normal titanium band ring. But oh boy, can it do so much more, because despite having between 4 to 5 days of battery life, this is all of the smart health tracking features that you need, including tracking your sleep, stress levels, blood oxygen, and fitness. But what is really brilliant is that it takes all of this data and provides actionable information that you can actually use. For example, it can tell you how much sleep debt you have. As you can see, I've had a whopping 1 hour and 35 minutes of sleep last night, so I am 5.5 hours in sleep debt. And we can also see that my VO2 max score is showing that I've got the cardio levels of a 29-year-old, which is far, far older than I am. So I've been adding more cardio into my workout routine. Or what I mean to say is that I've begun to do some cardio for the first time since high school. This has been the perfect companion in improving my health over the past 6 months, and I can't wait to see what new features get added in the future. And best of all, you do not have to pay for a subscription to use all of these features. If you would like to check it out, you can save 10% through the link in the description, and every single purchase helps out my channel a lot. So thank you for all of your support. So Global Banking and Finance Review reported this week that there are some worrying signs for the launch of Huawei's new flagship phone, the Mate 70. Now this is an important launch for Huawei, because where last year they broke free of the US sanctions by producing their own 7nm Kirin 9000S processor that was made in part by state-owned Chinese company SMIC. This year they have broken free completely by launching their new Harmony Next operating system that is finally not based on Android. Yep, if you didn't know, Harmony OS until now was just built upon the Android open source project. But the problem is that hype for the Mate 70 this year is far lower than last year, and it's even a bit difficult to call the Mate 60's last year's phone a success, as only 12 to 13 million units have been shipped compared to the initial estimates of 15 to 16 million. To put it into perspective, Samsung sold 27 million Galaxy S23 series phones last year, and things look even worse if we take a look at another one of Huawei's flagship phones, the Pura 70, that was released recently. The questionably designed phone has only shipped 5 million units since April, so it's safe to say that with limited hardware improvements over last year's phone, that sales are estimated to be lower this year for the Mate 70. At first glance, however, this report does seem to go against a Reuters report that suggests that Huawei's supply chain is struggling to meet demand for the Mate 70, as 6.7 million people have made a reservation. But the thing is that these numbers aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Huawei doesn't require an actual commitment or even a deposit to make a reservation, so it's more like an expression of interest. For example, the trifold Mate XT Ultimate earlier this year received 3 million pre-orders, but it's only expected to ship between 500,000 to 1 million devices this year, which, to be fair, is still very impressive for a phone so expensive. And we've also got the situation where selling devices out isn't exactly difficult because the yields of their 7nm chips are just so low. It might sound that I'm being a little bit harsh on Huawei, and maybe I am. Maybe when starting a new operating system, that's best to create something familiar so that customers won't be overwhelmed by a giant learning curve like that we saw with Windows Phone, for instance. But the thing is, being a tech reporter, I just want to see something new and exciting, and I'm afraid that the Mate 70 devices look anything but that. Anyway, this is something that I never expected to see. Google is extending support for the Pixel 6 and 7 phones, and they are planning on providing 2 years of extra operating system updates. Yet from a company that likes to drop their products at the drop of a hat, this is quite a welcome surprise. Now, this is absolutely fantastic news for those people who purchase older Pixel phones but felt left out when Google announced that the Pixel 8 will get a record-breaking 7 years worth of software updates, up from the previous 3. Now, the software support war that Android manufacturers are having right now, I think, is something that I can absolutely get behind. I used to only recommend iPhones to people who like to keep their phones for a long time, chiefly because iPhones typically got at least 5 years worth of updates compared to the 1 or 2 that Android phones typically got. But things have now changed. After announcing that the Pixel 6 will get 3 years worth of updates in 2021, Samsung then announced that they would offer 4 years for the S22. So then Google announced that they would up that to a whopping 7 years with the Pixel 8, and even Motorola, who's traditionally awful for software updates, have increased their promise to 5 years with the Edge 50 Neo. And that means that if you have a Pixel 6, which could be had for less than $200 these days on the used market, you could be getting Android 16 in a couple of years. But that is assuming that the Tensor processor can run it. And I have to be honest, I'm not sure if it can. Now, here is a story that could set an example for countries trying to save their manufacturing sectors. So, Indonesia earlier this year made waves in the tech community for banning iPhone sales in the country. But Apple wasn't the only company that was affected, as Google's Pixel phones were also banned. Why did this happen though? Well, it is because to sell a smartphone in Indonesia, you need at least 40% of handset components to be sourced locally, and this can include a wide variety of things, including manufacturing, firmware development, or even investment in innovation projects. So there are different routes that a phone brand can go through to bring a phone to market in Indonesia. Samsung and Xiaomi, for instance, have built assembly plants in the country, and Apple in the past has developed developer academies. However, in November, that wasn't deemed enough, and Indonesian authorities not only confiscated iPhone 16s in the country, but they went as far as to destroy at least some of them. Now, a lot of people don't realize, but Indonesia is actually a pretty massive market. It's actually the 4th most populous country in the world, with almost 280 million people population-wise. It isn't actually that far off the US with 335 million people. So while as of this year in September, Apple holds just 12% market share in Indonesia, it still isn't a market that Apple would want to leave. So in response, Apple has announced that they are going to invest $1 billion in creating a manufacturing plant in the country, and it will create parts not just for smartphones, but also other Apple products there. And while that does sound like a little bit of a punishment, it's actually something that suits Apple completely, because they've been trying to diversify their production away from China for a while now. They've now got plants in Brazil, India, the US, and now we can add Indonesia to that list. So the lesson is, if you want an iPhone manufacturing plant in your country, all you have to do is ban iPhones and destroy some of them. And now I'm afraid that we need to hold a funeral for one of Microsoft's greatest products, the Surface Studio. Yet the greatest product that Microsoft may have ever released seems to have been discontinued. So it's hard to believe that the original Surface Studio was unveiled all the way back in 2016. Until this day, which is actually 8 years after, it's still the most futuristic looking desktop computer that I think has ever been made. For those unfamiliar, the form factor basically sort of resembles a Mac Mini with a massive 28-inch 4.5K touchscreen display mounted on top with a brilliantly versatile hinge. And that hinge allowed it to smoothly, I mean really smoothly, it felt like magic really, transition from a normal all-in-one desktop to a massive drawing tablet. And the Surface style accessory was just a genius piece of design as well. Unfortunately though, it did have a few problems. It was prone to unreliability. Overheating was a problem. It was both very difficult to repair and impossible to upgrade. You couldn't use it as a standalone monitor. Microsoft hardly ever upgraded it. And the final Surface Studio 2 Plus model, it started at $4,500 US. Yep, it's not hard to see why it didn't find many customers. But it was such a beautiful product that could have worked really nicely as a standalone monitor. But alas, Microsoft never developed the product that far, and now it is dead. Anyway, stock started running out in recent weeks, and Microsoft confirmed to Windows Central this week that it is no longer manufacturing the device. So with no sign of successor, it seems like that the all-in-one PC space is largely dead, with even Apple abandoning most of the segment. Now, would you buy an updated Surface Studio? I would be tempted, but let me know in the comments. And finally, we wrap up with Spotify Wrapped, the end of year celebration that we all now have to endure since YouTube Rewind went the way of BlackBerry OS. And we are talking about Spotify Wrapped this week because they've decided to team up with Google Notebook LM AI and do something really weird with AI that some people have said flopped, others have mentioned is a little bit too realistic, and others claim is just so bad. Now, for those of us who are still using their Palm Pres in 2024, well, actually, that's not true because I had Spotify on my Palm Pre. Okay, so for those of you who are still using your Palm Trios in 2024, Spotify Wrapped is an annual tradition that gives you a nice summary of the artists and songs that you listen to most throughout the year. At first, it was just a list, and then it became a video, and now Spotify have turned it into a podcast with AI. And I hate to say it, but I actually kind of liked it. So the one that I listened to unfortunately wasn't mine as I've switched to Apple Music, but I was impressed by the deep knowledge that the AI had of the artists and songs. The banter between the DJs was amusing, and I just kind of liked the novelty of it. The two AI DJs especially were very good, and I thought they were quite listenable. The whole thing was only a few minutes long. I'm not sure if I could have listened to an hour of it, but I thought that it was very well done for what it was. I think it was also a great way to introduce people to both the AI DJ features and also the podcast features of Spotify that I know a lot of people have been ignoring. And so if you haven't seen yours yet, you can find it on the home screen of your Spotify app if you are in the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Ireland, and Sweden. You might not like it, but it was at least rather amusing. And that brings us to the end of this week's Tech Rundown. Remember that if you would like to give your 2 cents about any of the topics that I covered this week, you can share them in the comment section below, and I may feature it in next week's episode. Feel free to give me a like and subscribe as well. And if you would like to see me discuss these topics and more, you can join me on Sunday mornings at 7:20 AM on Talk TV in the UK. And until next week, toodaloo.